I'm at mile 52. I come into the aid station. My crew is there. My parents are there. My dad's there. And I'm like, I think I'm behind and I'm not doing well. And I just burst into tears. I'm just sobbing. And I hear someone go, is she a 100-miler? And I heard my husband say, yeah, she's in the 100-mile race. People I had never met before in my life, people working the aid stations, they're like just right on me, like, okay. And this gentleman, Chad, who I had never met, he sits me down, he makes eye contact with me, and he says, I've been right where you are. You are fine. You have more than half the time left to do this race, and you are over halfway done. You are going to be just fine. And I've experienced that, I think, at every ultra race I've ever done. Somebody I have never met in my life has made all the difference in my life, even in just like this little tiny moment.
This is your host, Brendan, and you're listening to the Ordinary to Ultra podcast. This podcast is all about helping you run your first ultramarathon and beyond. Tune in to hear new and experienced ultra runners share how they got into running in the first place, what inspired them to run an ultra, training and race day tips, and the gripping story of their first ultramarathon. Prepare yourself to be inspired as you hear stories of grit, sometimes failure, but ultimately triumph when our guests finally cross the finish line. Hey, Laura, thanks so much for joining me today on the Ordinary to Ultra podcast. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, we're super excited to hear your story today. But I like to first start by asking my guests about their go-to run, their go-to route, I should say. I think everyone has one. It's like, oh, this is my favorite route that's close to home that I always do. I just would love to know what that looks like for you.
Yeah, so I am super lucky that I have a lot of great routes close to home. Cuyahoga Valley National Park is like my backyard in Ohio, but
Sweet.
probably my go-to is the Towpath Trail, which is along the Ohio and Erie Canal. And, it's maybe not the most exciting at times because it is fairly flat, but it is very predictable. And in the fall, it is absolutely gorgeous. And it's like 5 minutes from my house. So that's usually my go-to. And it goes on for miles and miles and miles. So whatever I want to do that day, I can do.
Yeah. Does it have an actual end?
It does, although you can actually, at this point, I think take it. So I'm in Akron, Ohio, and I think you can take it almost all the way up to Lake Erie. And as far as going south, it goes for more miles than I can say. I think there's actually ways to take that all the way to southern Ohio. So you could, it's indefinite.
Indefinite. That is sweet. That's sweet having something like that. We've got Blacksmith Fork Canyon near where I live, and it runs up, but it only runs up 3.5 miles until you run into private property, and then you have to turn around, which is sort of a bummer. But
that is a little bit of a bummer. One of the things I appreciate about the towpath too is that you can access all sorts of places along the trail if you just deviate just a little bit. And I'm going to say about 5 miles north of where I usually get on the trail, there's my favorite ice cream shop. So should I want to maybe finish up there and then have somebody pick me up, if I go south, about 10 miles and then come back up, it's a nice ending point right on the trail. It works out really well.
That is perfect. I love it when there's ice cream on the way. Let's go. They
also have
really
the best
sweet
frozen lemonade, which when you're running and it's 80, 90 degrees out,
that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I got an ice cream maker recently. It's like the Ninja Creamy, I think is what it's called. And you freeze the lemonade powder that you get at Walmart or wherever. You stick that in water, freeze it, and then it spins it up for you and makes an Italian ice out of it. It's sort of like a sorbet, like a lemon sorbet though when it's finished, and it's fantastic.
Perfect.
That's
after
my
running
weakness.
Treat.
Yeah, exactly. Anything like that, Dole Whip, like fruity ice cream after a run is something else.
Let me tell you, this ice cream shop, they have a lemonade that includes Dole Whip.
Oh my gosh,
I
yes.
know. It doesn't get any
What?
better than that.
Crap, I need to try that. I love Dole Whip. That's my weakness. Awesome. That's fun to hear. Laura, I want to head back in time in your running history, and we'd love to learn about what got you running in the first place. Were you a track kid? Were you not? Like, when did that start for you?
I was the antithesis of a track kid. I was actually the kid who almost failed gym in junior high. And I distinctly remember my parents being called in to talk to the gym teacher about my lack of enthusiasm in the outfield. And so, yeah, I was not a track kid. Although when I was 16, 17, 18, I did like a little bit of running, like 5K stuff. And then I
Okay.
went off to college and did not do much running at all. And in fact, I had some health issues. I would say I was fairly not fit, to the point actually where I was smoking a half a pack of cigarettes a day. A lot of cognitive dissonance there, like rationally, I knew what I should be doing to be healthy and to be fit, and but I just wasn't doing it. And there were a number of years where I felt really, really, really crummy. Um, and part of that had to do with living with a chronic pain condition that had started when I was a teenager. I was about 14 years old when my symptoms started. And that was really challenging. The condition I have, there's not really any effective treatments, things that are effective across the majority of people living with the condition. And for a very long time, I really didn't know how to manage it. And I kind of went on a downward spiral. And then at one point, I did kind of a Hail Mary treatment strategy. And overnight, I felt better. And I had always told myself that if I ever get some relief, even for just a moment, I'm going to take my life back because I could see the downward spiral happening. And when I had that relief, I made the decision, all right, I'm going to do some things. So I quit smoking, I started eating better, and most importantly, I started running again. And I distinctly remember the days of barely being able to walk a half a mile. And I learned really quickly that to be successful in this kind of behavior change or life change, you have to meet yourself where you are. And so I had to give myself a lot of grace, recognize where I was, and just make a gradual progression. And one of the most important things to me was actually running with my dad. And it was like we never spoke about it, but he knew, I know that he knew how important it was for me to start running again. And he was the one with me when I could barely walk a half a mile. We'd be trying to go around the block near his house, my childhood home.
Hmm.
And he was just there, right there beside me. He was never judgmental. It was just whatever you can do, let's go out and do it. And we eventually got to a place where we could do 5Ks together, and we were doing 10Ks together. And I signed up for a 10-mile race. The Twin Cities,
Ooh,
actually, it was a 10-mile, the Medtronic 10-miler. And at that time, 10 miles sounded like just unfathomable.
I know
And
it. Hmm.
but he was there. He came up to Minneapolis with me, and he was there at the finish line in St. Paul. And I think I never looked back from there. That moment of realizing, like, wow, 10 miles just seemed impossible before, and here I was crossing that finish line. There's my dad jumping up and down, and yeah, that guy. I was just hooked. After that, it was done. I was hooked.
That's so cool. So he didn't run that with you, but he went with you and was
He,
there at the finish line.
yeah, he the longest run, like training run we did was almost 10 miles, and he that was
Okay.
actually the longest run he's ever done in his life. He had run all his life doing like 5Ks,
Yeah.
10Ks,
Okay.
and but never really took the next step to like the half marathon or marathon. But when he
Hmm.
started running with me again, he was in his early 70s. So
Oh,
when he did that
yeah.
10-mile run with me, he was in his 70s.
Oh man, yeah.
And
Thank you
he
for
would,
saying that. That puts it into perspective.
yes, it does. And honestly, he wound up having he dealt with cancer, and if he had not dealt with, he's good now, and turning 89 in April. But I will tell you,
Yay!
if he had not gone through that, and if he still could, he would be out there running with me in a heartbeat. I know it.
What a guy.
Although I tell him honestly, because I remember the first 100 miler that I did the morning of, I was getting ready to go, and he came down and he said, "I wish I could be out there with you." And I looked at him and I said, "But you will be, every single step." And that is absolutely the truth. I owe
Mhm.
him so much for those early years of his patience and grace and helping me get back out there. And I carry him with me everywhere. Every run I do, I'm thinking of him. So even though he can't physically be out there with me, he is.
Do you think you would have got into running without his support, or was that
No,
crucial? Yeah.
it was absolutely integral to me getting back into running. Yeah, I've ever since I was a kid, I've wanted to be just like my dad. He had he has a PhD. He's Dr. Santuri, and I think I think I was 9 years old when I decided I was going to go get a PhD too. So, yeah, I've always wanted to be just like my dad. So I think that was an important piece of it.
Dang, that's awesome. So you were also Dr. Santuri.
I am, although I tell everyone just call me Laura. Really,
It has a nice
just
ring to it, though.
I mean, it
Just so
does.
you know.
I will say I worked really hard to get there. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned how you have chronic pain and you have this running. So is it worse when you're running? Like, or how does that relationship look like?
That is such a good question, and it seems like antithetical, right? To say that like running helps chronic pain, but for me that is absolutely the case. There are for the listeners, you can Google chronic overlapping pain conditions. There's a group of conditions called chronic overlapping pain conditions, or COPCs, and all of those conditions are thought to have a similar cause, a similar underlying cause, although they all kind of present differently. So if you've heard of fibromyalgia, that's one of them. Interstitial cystitis is another. It's always a mouthful to say. Even chronic low back pain is part of this cluster of conditions. And one of the interesting things about these chronic pain conditions is that, at least in part, there is this thought that part of the reason we have them is because our nervous system is overly sensitive. So think about if your nervous system was like a house alarm that went off every time a leaf blew down the street. That's a little bit like how my nervous system reacts. And one of the resulting factors from that is that you have pain. And one way you can treat conditions like that is to essentially calm your nervous system down. You can learn to manage stress really well
Mm.
if you can. People talk about deep breathing all the time, and it sounds really cliche, but if you can find ways to bring your blood pressure down, get your heart rate down, calm your nervous system down, you're going to feel better. And for me, physical activity, and specifically running, is very much that. For me, running is like meditation. I can't sit still. I can't do traditional meditation. I wish very much that I could. Um, I see your hand go up. You're there with me, huh? Um, but I can do active meditation, and that is absolutely what running has done. The other thing that running has done is it's taught me that pain is temporary. You learn real quick when you're training for an ultra, or when you've experienced an ultra, and even obviously other types of racing too, but I think especially so in ultra running, you're going to experience at least discomfort at some point. I don't care how good of a runner you are. And the really important thing to know is that when it happens, you can problem solve around it. You've got a whole bag of tools and things that hopefully you have practiced with in your training, and you can get through it. It will get better. I remember my first 100-mile race, 30 miles in, my knee started to hurt on downhills. And it was a trail 100. And I thought, gosh, how am I going to do another 70 miles with my knee hurting? But after a while, like I stopped thinking about it, and gosh, my knee stopped hurting. And so it didn't last the entire
Whoa.
time. And those things are going to pop up. And it definitely taught me ultra running taught me that pain is temporary. You will get through it. Things will get better. You have tools and strategies at your disposal to feel better. You just have to do some problem solving to figure out which ones are going to work for you. And so for me, I don't go to a doctor anymore for my chronic pain condition. I'm not on medications for it. I get out and I run, and that's how I manage it.
Wow. And how often do you run, or do you need to run to keep the chronic pain down?
You know, I have other strategies in my tool belt too. Running is my
Okay.
primary one, but I will say, usually, and I work with a coach. I I I,
Okay.
I do strongly advocate working with somebody who has a good, solid understanding of how to put together a training plan, especially the type of progression that you need to get to the place of doing an ultra and how to get the physical adaptations in your body that you will need to get to the point of being successful in an ultra. So working with my coach, depending on what kind of training I'm doing, I'm usually running 4 to 6 times a week. But I'm doing other stuff too. So I'm strength training, I'm doing mobility work, I get on the bike occasionally, but running is my primary thing.
Okay. 4 to 6. That's great. That's incredible that can be your medication. Many people would go think, yeah, I'm going to need to be taking pills for the rest of my life, or whatever the doctor prescribed thing would maybe normally be. So that's incredible.
And I should give the caveat that I am not anti-traditional medicine. So
Okay,
I want to
cool.
be very clear that
Great.
there is absolutely a role for traditional medicine. But what I am an advocate for, especially when it comes to chronic pain, based on what we know about the neuroscience of pain, is that a biopsychosocial approach is really important. And what that means is it needs to be a combination of traditional medicine, but also the psychological things, like I talk about running being my form of meditation and calming my nervous system. But the other really important piece of that word is the social aspect. And that is the other thing outside of kind of the meditative effects of running for me. The social piece is probably one of the most important draws to ultra running for me
Hmm.
because I've never been in a community like the ultra community. And if you've ever felt like you weren't at home or you didn't have a place, and I have definitely felt that way over the course of my life at times. I'm the short, chubby kid. I'm not. I'm not the one at the front of a half marathon or marathon. I used to be the one who was usually like running just in front of the ambulance in half marathons and full marathons. Um, and I would go to those races and always feel a little bit like an imposter, but I have never felt that way at an ultra race. There are people, it doesn't matter how short, tall, what your body shape is, doesn't matter your politics, any of those other things that often divide us or make us feel like an outsider. Um, I have always felt like I have belonged in an ultra community. I mean, where else can you go, meet a complete stranger, and then spend hours with them when you are delirious, hallucinating, half awake, but like spend hours with them, learn about their lives, and then be connected to them in a really authentic way for the rest of your life. It's a really special thing.
Yeah, I look forward to that. I hear that from many people, especially those who've run 100 milers. Like, you're with these people for so long, and it's so long that you have so much time to talk to them and connect.
That is
Wow.
100% for sure. And I will tell you that when you get there, my best piece of advice is make eye contact. Like it is so easy to get caught up, and this sounds so cliche because I draw a lot of analogies from ultra running just to life in general, but I think it works. It is so easy for us to get caught up in our own stuff, right? Or
Hmm.
to isolate or withdraw, especially when we're struggling. And one of the last hundreds that I did, and we can talk about this later, but I was really, really struggling. And what saved me was just simply making eye contact with someone, which led to a 4-hour conversation and a friend that I will have for the rest of my life.
That's really cool. Yeah, and you need that in
Yeah.
those hard moments. But
Yes.
yeah, and when you go through, it's just when you go through something, I imagine, because I haven't done it, but when you go through something so hard with someone else, like there's this bond. Like it seems like it can't help but happen almost.
It's inevitable.
Inevitable. Yeah. Um, okay, Laura, we've touched on, I mean, loved hearing about how running is your medication, sort of, right, for
Yeah.
your chronic pain condition. It's amazing. and and we've heard bits and pieces about your ultra running. I'd love to hear about when you got into your, well, like when you thought about doing an ultra, like when did that happen? And then I'd love to talk about your first ultra marathon.
Yeah, it happened back in 2017.
Okay.
And I think I was at my parents' house, and I'm not sure even how I heard about it, but I came across a 50K, the Lakefront
Hmm.
50K, in Chicago, right along the lake. And I thought, well, I mean, it's like 5 more miles. Like, if I can do a marathon, I mean, surely I can just tack on another 5 miles. And I remember telling my dad, and he was kind of like laughing and shaking his head at me, like, all right, okay. And yeah, so I just kind of signed up on a whim. And then I hired a coach probably 2 weeks before my 50K, which
Whew.
I truly recommend. And not that I wasn't training for the 50K, like I had one of those static like spreadsheet plans for a 50K, but I would encourage people perhaps to engage a professional, a coaching professional sooner than 2 weeks before your first ultra. Um, so he was kind of limited in what he was able to help me with, but I was
Yeah.
training. I was training,
Great.
and the plan was my husband was going to come up with me and be my crew, and one of my dogs had to have surgery like 2 days before. So I told him, I said, "Look, you got to stay home and take care of our four-legged kid." So I went to my first ultra by myself, which is also something I do not recommend that you do. I I had read online like, okay, you should have a drop bag, right? Because this particular race was like maybe 3 or 4 out and backs. I can't even remember, flat, along the lake, and just these out and backs. And there
Okay.
were people
Like
doing a
from one point, and it was like out and back, but
yes.
on different trails. Okay.
No, same trail.
Same
It
trail.
was
Same trail.
yeah, so you were
Great.
doing the same little pathway
Okay.
kind of over and over. And there were people doing the 50 miles. It was a 50 mile and a 50K.
Okay.
And so I got my drop bag. I also did things that you should not do, which is buy things like new things as backups the night before. So like, don't go buy new pairs of socks the night before, like, but I was a newbie. So I got my drop bag ready, and I went out there thinking, okay, just 5 more miles. Those 5 more miles felt like a lifetime. I remember calling my husband, I called my dad, um, and I made it, but I made it like about 5 minutes under the cutoff. So it was a
Whoa.
7 hour cutoff, and I was like, I
Whoa.
swear, somewhere around like 6 hours and 54 or 55 minutes. And
Yeah.
but I finished, and it was life changing. The people, I don't know how to describe it other than it is qualitatively different than running a half marathon or a marathon. Just like I, pe- the conversations I had, some stranger I didn't know was like, "Hey, do you need someone to run with you for a little while?" And just like, I don't even know where she came from. She wasn't like running the race. She was just like there as a spectator, or maybe she was crewing someone. And she came out and ran with me and chatted with me for a while. And that made all the difference. And
Whoa.
the aid stations, I was, I remember being blown away by the aid stations, because these are not your half marathon or marathon aid stations. These are like full buffets of food. Like people are eating real food. And I was just totally blown away by that. I drank a lot of Mountain Dew that first 50K too, which I also don't recommend.
Yummy. And
um,
this is all at the 50K. They had like I've always pictured the buffets at like long, with like 100 miles, maybe 50, 100Ks. But even at a 50K, they've got like
it
this
was
good food.
it was good food. And I don't remember if they had like a whole lot of hot food. I will tell you, like 100 milers are definitely a different thing where like you've got like burgers and pizza and all sorts of good stuff. But this was still like it was just mind blowing. And so I finished this race just barely. I went up to the race director and said, "Thank you for changing my life. I've never run a race this well run. Like this is amazing." And then I got in my car. I forgot my drop bag. So completely forgot my drop bag that was there and drove to my hotel in Chicago. I do not remember that drive. And I got back to my hotel room, ordered a bunch of room service, which I did not eat, and passed out. After realizing that one of my toenails had come off, and calling my husband in tears.
Oh my goodness.
So talk about newbie. Like like all the things like, hey, for those of you listening who have not run an ultra, don't do your first ultra by yourself. Don't drive after an ultra. You are basically intoxicated. I didn't really know that. So don't drive afterwards. Have a plan for afterwards, like what you might want to eat and how to take care of yourself. So many don't drink as much Mountain Dew as I did unless you've practiced with it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, so you hadn't practiced with Mountain Dew, but you made it. Your stomach was fine.
I made it, yes. Now the GI stuff is like you need to practice for like the longer 50-mile, 100K, 100-mile, anything beyond that. Like you must train with whatever you're going to be eating during the race. You need to be training with, because it is absolutely true to say that you have to train your gut as much as you are training your body. You're training your gut, you're training your legs, you're training your mind, all of that.
Well said. That was really fun. Thank you for sharing how you were after. I ran my first marathon about a month ago.
That's right. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think when we first talked, that was coming, right?
Yes.
So yeah, that happened, and I'm just imagining myself after that race. Luckily, my wife was there to drive me after to go. We went to Panda Express right after, but
excellent.
I can't imagine driving. The minute I stopped running, I was like, my head. I don't know. I was like not present.
And it is every time it happens, like it's not surprising, but it's still so fascinating. Every race I do, like the way you feel after you've stopped and you think, how was I just running? Like, I remember at the end of my first 100, I think my body basically shut down. I like sat down on a picnic bench and at a picnic table, and I was like holding my medal and just like staring at it enthralled, because I don't know.
You did it.
And then I went to get up, and I mean, I couldn't, like my muscles couldn't, like my calf muscles, I couldn't extend them. Like I had to be helped to the car, and you just think, gosh, but I was just running. Like it really is. It is amazing what your body can do. And when I'm saying that, like I'm including your mind too. I'm not a dualist. Like your mind is your body, and what you can do to keep yourself going. But then when you're like, oh, I'm done now, I'm at the finish line, your body's just like, okay, we're done now.
And would you say is it a good tip to try to reduce how much you stop? Because I'm imagining, like during the race, because I'm imagining how I was at the end of this marathon, and it can only be maybe harder in an ultra. But if I had stopped at there were some hills at like mile 20, 22, and if I had like walked, I think I would have added like an extra 30 minutes, because it would have taken me so much power to like get going again. Like I kept jogging and I jogged the entire time because I felt like if I stopped, I probably would be walking the rest of it.
With ultras, I think it's a unique thing because keep in mind that when you're doing an ultra versus a marathon, you're not at the same intensity in an ultra.
Yes.
Even the absolute best of us, right? The people who are podium finishers, you're still operating at a different intensity level. So I don't know that you can say that it's comparable to like what you're doing during a marathon where you're kind of more full throttle.
Yeah, I was
Like
like
with the technical
pushing
term.
it.
But with an ultra, you're at a lower intensity, and for me anyway, like it's run walk. I'm not running every single mile in 100 miles. I am definitely strategically building in walking, and I think it depends a bit on the person about stopping, because I definitely know people who like I remember one of the hundreds I did, there was this gentleman who we kind of did like this leapfrog thing, but I remember at one aid station, he was sitting down like eating an entire like giant burrito. And I think he sat there for a while to enjoy that giant burrito, and he was able to get up and keep going. And so, and depending on what kind of race you're doing, you might even be taking naps. So when I
Hmm.
did a race for the ages in Tennessee, you have as many hours as your age. So, there were people, the
Whoa.
oldest person there was 91. He took full naps. I think he went home and napped and then came back. So,
91?
yeah, yes, I'm not kidding. He put us all to shame. Actually, I think almost half that field was 70 and up. That was one of my absolute favorite experiences. And that was a really interesting experience too, because that was a 1 mile loop in a parking lot in a suburban park. Yep.
Cannot imagine
But so you train
these
though,
timed races.
but you
Ugh.
train for that, right? So like if you're gonna do a longer race like that, then you have to practice whatever you're going to be doing during the race. Especially as you get closer to the race, you should be practicing. If you're going to use poles, you better get those poles out. If you're going to stop and sit for a while, you better practice getting yourself going again, because the way your body feels after you've sat for a moment, or maybe even taken a nap, like you've got to be able to get yourself up and keep
Hmm.
moving. So that practice piece and training to get into a rhythm to say, oh yeah, I remember what this feels like. I did this in my training. I can do this here is so important.
That's great advice. Okay. I'd like to now ask you, Laura, you've had some time to maybe think about it. If you could choose an ultra to share with us, maybe we'll have time for two. We'll see. But for now, we'd love to hear about one ultramarathon that is special to you for whatever reason. Maybe it was extremely difficult and just impressive to you that you were able to finish, or for whatever other reason it's special. We'd love to hear about an
Yeah,
ultra.
it's hard not to talk about my first 100 miler, because that was like one of those just absolutely life-changing experiences, and I did it with a community of people that some of the best human beings I know. But I want to share a race for the ages, which I did last September. And so that's that race where you have as many hours as your age. And again, but for those who are 40 and younger, you just get 40 hours. But like I said,
Darn.
I know, just 40 hours. The oldest person there is 91, and a whole spectrum of people in between. And so it's a 1 mile loop in a parking lot in a suburban park in Tennessee. And it was hot, like hot. Okay. So anyway, so I did it when I was 41.
Tennessee.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, I've got 41 hours. So let's just see what I can do. And I knew like 100 was like my minimum. I absolutely have to do 100. And if I get there, I'll be good with it. And I started at 8 o'clock at night, because everybody finishes together, which is the other thing that's really, really cool. So their end date is known. Everybody finishes on Monday, Labor Day at noon. and everybody else starts based on your age. And so I started 8 o'clock at night. And my first night, I went out maybe a little bit too fast, but I was feeling okay. And this is one of those races that's run by Lazarus Lake, the gentleman who runs the Barkley Marathons. Um,
Oh, I've heard of those.
yes, he is such a nice human being. What an awesome person. And so I get through my first night, and then we get into the heat of the next day. And I realized, I think at that point, what I had signed up for, and I had done a heat protocol too beforehand. So I thought, I think I'm going to be in good shape. But I literally would walk a mile, come back to my own little aid station, my tent. I would shove ice everywhere I possibly could. I even had one of those UV blocking umbrellas just to like block the sun. But that first day in the heat it was hard to describe how brutal that was. So by the second night, and you're thinking, I'm going to do a whole other night. Middle of that second night, I was, so it was the longest I'd ever gone. So I think I had just broken like 30 hours, and my longest before this had been like 29 hours.
Hmm.
So I'm at 30 hours, and I realize that I'm not walking a straight line anymore. And then I almost ran into a tree. Okay. So this is where like and I had watched the veterans, the people who are just more knowledgeable than me. They have been taking naps, and I had not been taking naps. So lesson learned. I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take a nap. So another lesson learned is for this type of race, pick a place that you're actually going to be able to want to sleep. So I had gotten myself a little tent that was on the ground, and I thought, if I get into this tent, I will never get back up.
Hmm.
So I sat in a chair, I got myself a pillow, and I did one of those awful airplane sleeps, the head
Hmm.
bobbing thing for like 20 minutes. And I did that, and I woke up and I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to get back out there. And I just remember feeling like I was at mile 90, and I was like, how am I going to do another 10 miles? I can barely walk. If I get back out there, and I thought, I'm just going to make eye contact with as many people as I can. And I'm walking along and I make eye contact. I come up alongside this gentleman, and I look up at him and he looks at me, and I was like, hey man, how you doing? He's like, one foot in front of the other, right? And we struck up a conversation. I realized he's 85 years old. He is also, he's 1 mile ahead of me. He's at mile 91. And he was saying how he had slept in his car for a bit and he was kind of struggling. And maybe a few loops later, I realize he's telling people that I'm pacing him. And he's telling people like I'm only still moving because she's moving. We spent like 4 hours together. And it was, a slow 4 hours. But I learned all about him, all about his cats and his life. This is a man who has, like, I think, world records. He has run across entire countries and like entire countries. And we're getting close. And I remember he's like, I just need to get to 100. I'm like, all right, Don, I'm going to get you to 100. We're going to get there. And so he's 1 mile ahead of me. So we get to his 100, my 99, and I will never forget the moment. So we both kind of cross over, and we make eye contact again. He looks at me and he's like, if I could keep going, I would do 1 more mile with you, but I can't even do it. But you go get that last mile. And I said, I will do it, Don. Thank you. And like, I'll never forget that moment. And I went out and did my last mile, and we're Facebook friends now. I follow him, he follows me. We say congratulations to each other when we finish races. And now I'm friends with this awesome runner, 85 years old, who completed 100 miles that day. And here I am thinking like this was a huge achievement for me. I can't even imagine. And seeing all those folks just completely blasting away myths about aging and about being an older adult, it was a beautiful thing. It was really magical to see. I mean, those people put me to shame. People twice my age it was just awesome. Um, yeah, yeah, it was a pretty special race.
This was the race you mentioned earlier where you met your 4-hour buddy.
Yep, it
Sounds
is.
like
Yep.
that is really cool, making connections like that.
Yeah.
And 85. Yeah, this is new to me. I didn't know 85-year-olds were running 100-mile
Yeah, and they're putting
ultramarathons.
people
Oh
our
my
age and younger to
gosh.
shame. And I really think there is something about the wisdom that comes with the experience. And so if you have an opportunity to run with someone who is older than you, one, don't make assumptions about their abilities. And then two, listen to them because a wealth of experience can come your way if you're willing to listen. I mean, truly, and that's the thing that I think is really cool about the ultra community too, is that it really is dispelling myths. Don't make assumptions about people about their age. Don't make assumptions about people because of their weight. You'll be wrong, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
It is. Man, people are awesome.
Yeah, really,
Blowing my
truly.
mind here.
I leave every ultra race with a renewed faith in humanity, and I know how that sounds, but I mean it.
It seems like the kind of people you'd meet at 100-mile races are just quality people. I mean, I think everyone has their good in them and everyone has potential, but like you're going to meet top-notch human beings at 100-mile races. Like only 0.00001% of people in the world have the, whatever the determination, the characteristics, I think that it takes to do something that hard. Is
Well,
that true?
I think so, but also it's not just your fellow runners. I will tell you the volunteers and the people who are crewing at these races are also the absolute best human beings you will ever meet. I remember my first 100-mile race. I'm coming in at mile 52 to an aid station. I am not able to do math. So I'm looking at my watch and I think that I'm behind in my times. I had this elaborate spreadsheet that was like, when you're at this aid station, this is what time it's going to be, and all this other stuff. And it just wasn't computing in my head. And it was the longest I'd ever done. The longest race I had done prior was 50 miles, and I'm at mile 52. I come into the aid station, my crew is there, my parents are there, my dad's there, and I'm like, I think I'm behind and I'm not doing well. And I just burst. I walked into the aid station. I just burst into tears. I'm just sobbing. And I hear someone go, "Is she a 100-miler?" And I heard my husband say, "Yeah, she's in the 100-mile race." People I had never met before in my life, people working the aid stations, they're like just right on me, like, okay. And this gentleman, Chad, who I had never met, who I'm also now friends with on Facebook, we'll be connected together for the rest of our lives. He sits me down, he makes eye contact with me, and he says, "I've been right where you are. You are fine. You have more than half the time left to do this race, and you are over halfway done. You are going to be just fine." And like that eye contact. And then someone else is like, "Go get her some Coke, get her some caffeine." And just people rallying around me. And then they're like, "All right, time to get up, get yourself back out there. You're fine." And and I've experienced that, I think, at every ultra race I've ever done. Somebody I have never met in my life has made all the difference in my life, even in just like this little tiny moment. Someone who's like, "Hey, do you need a grilled cheese? Do you want a piece of pizza?" The people at the the last 100 I did, they were making pierogies, and those pierogies just like saved my life. I can't tell you. I was like, when I got to the aid station, and I realized, and I'm a back of the packer, so sometimes that hot food isn't available. like they run out. But no, they had a good supply at this aid station, and these were hot pierogies. And I just remember looking at them and saying, thank you so much for still having hot food. These people just slaving away, getting these pierogies ready. It's those little things where someone makes this giant difference in your life. And you may never see them again. And I couldn't recognize them if I saw them on the street, but the impact they had was profound. So it's your fellow runners, but it's the crew, it's the pacers, it's the volunteers, it's the race directors who will sit at a finish line for 30 hours and greet every single finisher. It's unreal.
That is unreal. I need to experience this.
You do.
I talk to so many of you every week. And I'm just at the beginning of my ultra journey here, but man, y'all get me so pumped.
You'll get there.
Yeah, I'm
and then
planning
one of us can interview you, right? You're gonna.
Yeah, that would be fun. Yeah, I interviewed myself for the marathon and stuck it up a few weeks ago, but I think it would be more fun if I had you come on or someone else.
I think get like 2 or 3 of us. Get a little panel going, because I think I would love to talk to you after you complete your first ultra, especially having talked to so many people who have completed them. I would just love to hear your perspective after the fact.
I'll do it. That's a great idea. Well, I'll remember this.
Good.
Thank you for that. And wow, I've got the feels, or whatever you want to call it, in my soul about your moment with Chad. That is nuts. Like, oh my goodness, that's exactly what you needed, probably.
It was, and
I mean that
the image of him, his face, and him looking at, making eye contact, I'll never forget that. And the kindness of someone who has never met me to sit down and be like, I'm going to make sure this person keeps going. There's nothing like it. So
no. Laura, how many, if you can count, how many ultras have you done? And in particular, hundreds, but the other distances as well.
I've done 500 milers. I've done a couple of 40 milers. I've done at least 2 50 milers. And then I've done a number of 50Ks. I do a lot of like the like a 24-hour. There's a race like literally in my backyard on the towpath. They have this towpath plus a little extra loop of another trail, and you just have 24 hours to do as much as you want. And I've done a number of those too. So
timed.
Yeah, I like the timed runs are a unique experience, and I encourage people to try both. Try the timed experience, and they have them from 6, 12, 24 hours and more. And then try the other, the actual kind of set distance. They're kind of different experiences, but enjoyable in their own ways. And you train for them in some ways a little bit differently to be ready for it. I ran loops in my neighborhood. My neighbors must have thought I was insane because I did like a 1-mile loop in my neighborhood for hours to prepare for a race for the ages. And that prep is going to look totally different than a 100-miler in the woods. Even if that's looped, 4 25-mile loops is just a different beast than 101-mile loops, especially 101-mile loops on asphalt. So
yes.
But I think, so I've been really privileged to have the opportunity to try a lot of different types of races, and I have found joy in all of them.
Yeah. And a lot of these you travel for. Is that true?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, I'm lucky that there's a lot in my neighborhood, right? Like I've got Burning River, Mohican's not terribly far. There's a canal corridor is literally on the towpath in my backyard. I love the Indiana Trail series in northern Indiana, which is like only 3 hours from me. So I've been lucky that I've been able to take advantage of stuff that's local. But yeah, and then traveling to Tennessee, and then that's the other piece too. If you're going to travel to an ultra, that brings in a whole host of logistical issues you have to think about. So I have Bryce Canyon, the 50 miler, on my calendar right now, and that's at altitude. I don't train at altitude, so what I'm going to need to do is fly to Vegas, stay below 2,500 feet until the day before the race. I will not get to Hatch, Utah until the night before because altitude sickness. I'm trying to avoid altitude sickness. So there's all these logistical things. So when you travel to an ultra, that's also a whole set of factors you need to consider.
When's Bryce Canyon?
Bryce Canyon is in May. I want to say it might be like May 17th or 18th or something. Let me see. I believe it's May 18th. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is going to be awesome. I love Bryce.
I do too. It's beautiful.
Okay, you've been. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's beautiful.
I've done a 25-ish mile backcountry backpacking trip. Probably maybe on the trail that you'll be running on. I don't know.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, that is so cool. Jealous.
Could be you soon.
Yes, I hope so. Yeah, on that note of, I can't remember what we were saying, but I am hopefully going to be pacing some folks for 100 milers this year, and that will be a super cool experience. So then I can like dip my toes into the upper distances, right?
Yeah, and you get it you get a sense for just overall what it's like. And the role of the pacer, man, people who pace are saints, because when you pace somebody, it's not about you, it's about them, right? And everybody's different. So some people, like my brother, paces me occasionally, and he's perfect because he's like my twin, even though we're not. So he knows me really, really well, and he knows like when to like just stop talking, don't talk to me, just be there, versus tell me a stupid joke, make me laugh. So you make sure you chat with the folks you're pacing. They get a little bit of a sense of kind of what they need. My first 100 miler, I was really lucky that I had someone who, by the way, had never met me, drove 4 hours to pace me for 30 miles. Just a friend of a friend. She's like, sure, it's her first 100. I'll come down and pace her. And bless her, man, she stayed ahead of me. And I just followed the backs of her shoes, had like little reflective things on them. And I just fixated on the back of her shoes. Mm-hmm. She would not let me let up. She was like, come on, keep up. We're going to keep the pace. Oh, that made all the difference. So pacers are awesome. And that's a wonderful way for you to get some experience with the ultra community and the ultra experience.
That's really cool. Have you paced yourself before for someone else?
I have not paced someone else. I would love to, especially if they're slower. I'm not super fast.
That's the trick. That would be the trick. It's like you are having to keep their pace. So.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to be the one to set the pace too. Like if I was really clear with the people who were pacing me, like, and again, that first race I did, I had like this elaborate set of spreadsheets. It was absurd. Like my husband did like the calculations, and so I was like, I knew exactly like where I thought I should be at each aid station. The last 100 miler I did, I was like, oh yeah, I need to pack my stuff the night before. Being somewhere in the middle is probably a good idea. But a lot less of a control freak in my last one. But that first one, having those pacers and having them know what I needed was just so important.
That's good to hear. That's cool. Lara, wrapping up, I'd love to ask you if you had one piece of advice that you could leave newer folks like me, folks that are considering getting into ultra running. Maybe they're not even convinced yet, but they're interested in the idea of it, but it just seems far away. What would you tell those folks?
You know, it's possible. For so long, I mean, if you had asked me, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, like if I would be running ultras every year, I would have been like, you're crazy. You're just crazy. Um, but I just think it's so important for people to know. I don't care what your background is. Maybe you were a track athlete. Maybe you're like me and you almost failed gym class in junior high. It's possible. And I especially want to make sure that people who are like me, who are living with chronic pain, I know that when you are at the very worst, it's hard to fathom doing something like this. And I'm not saying everybody with chronic pain has to go out and run ultras or run at all. But like whatever it is that you aspire to do, it's hard to imagine doing it when you live with chronic pain on a daily basis. And I guess my message for them especially is please know that it's possible. You will get better. This does get better. And you can get to a place where you're not thinking about it on a daily basis and you can achieve the things that you want to do. I just so very much want people who have experienced chronic pain like me to know that it's possible. And the one last little piece of advice I'll leave is when you do get to the place, like if you're running an ultra, my best piece of advice is what I said before. If you're struggling, make eye contact with someone. I promise you it'll be okay.
Yeah, I wrote that one down because that seems like great advice. And that's how you're going to make those really cool relationships and friends that you'll have for the rest of your life, which
and it applies
so cool.
outside of ultra racing too. If you're struggling, make eye contact.
Well said. That's true. Thank you, Lara. Thank you for coming on today, sharing your experiences dealing with the chronic pain, but then just these awesome race experiences. I appreciate your perspective and hope others will as well. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I hope I get an opportunity at some point to be interviewing you about your first ultra experience.
Let's make it happen.
Sounds good.
Hey, your host Brendan here. I just wanted to thank you personally for listening to today's episode. As someone preparing for my own first ultramarathon, I've found these conversations to be super valuable, and I hope they are for you as well. Whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or somewhere else, make sure to follow or subscribe so you know when the next episode comes out. Also, make sure you check out the show notes of this episode. There's a link to sign up for the Ordinary to Ultra email newsletter, to join our Facebook and Strava groups where you can meet other people striving to run their first ultra marathon, and see any links that our guests may have provided as well. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next episode.